Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the August 11th Raleigh Council Study Group, looking at council terms, compensation, and voter engagement. As we always do, we start off with reviewing our last meeting minutes. Those are from July 28th. Do we have any questions, concerns, corrections, anything related to those? If so, let me know.
Mrs. Weeks, I make a motion that we approve the July 28, 2021 meeting minutes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second by Robbie Reichard. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Okay, we'll move on. I think we may go fairly quickly today. The first item on the agenda is to review our final recommendations, and I'm gonna just go through them quickly, just abbreviated, without any of the rationale behind it. And we can get into whatever anybody wants to, but we essentially have 6 recommendations, and the first one, and as you recall, we basically approved the first 4 and submitted those, and this is partly for the benefit of anybody from the public. We submitted an interim report on, I think, June 15th to council, and so that was the first 4 recommendations, which were recommending transitioning from 2-year to 4-year terms. The second recommendation was staggering terms, so that all district representatives were up for election on one side of the cycle, and then the 2 at-large and the mayor would be run for election on the other side of the cycle. And the thinking was that kind of one election would focus kind of more on the localized issues within districts, potentially, certainly other things as well. And then the other side of the cycle would be kind of the broader directional issues of the city, and kind of in less focused on maybe district specific issues. Now, that's just an assumption on some of our part. Obviously, the election would be whatever about the issues are at the time, and they could be both citywide or anything in between. The third recommendation was to increase total compensation for the mayor and city council, and we set forth specific recommendations for that, which was in the interim report. And then the fourth recommendation, which was co-opted by the General Assembly, was to move the elections to 11 even years. And again, for the benefit of the public, the General Assembly passed a bill that was that adjusted a number of cities' elections due to the delay in census data. And so some of the cities, most of the cities were moved to March 2022. The city of Raleigh's election was moved to November of 2022. And then that legislation also made permanent future elections to even years, not obviously the November, any sort of delay, but going forward, all future elections would be an even number of years. So the new additional recommendations that we have addressed since June 15th are to direct staff to develop and implement a voter engagement program. And then the last one that we came to terms on was to increase council size to 9, and which would be adding an additional council member, and that would be a district council member. So we would have 6 district representatives and 2 at-large representatives and the mayor, assuming council adopts those recommendations. So I know that, so those are the specific recommendations. And then the one that has a little complexity, well, 2 have a little complexity, but we've already addressed one of them, which is increasing compensation, because we've already kind of decided through a process what our recommendation would be for that. So the other one that was a little more complicated was our fifth recommendation, which was directing staff to develop and implement a voter engagement program. Obviously, our recommendation wasn't just to do that. We included specific actions, and those are included in the draft document that I circulated to you. So I'll just, I assume everybody's read the documents, so you see what they are. But for the benefit of the public, I'll read them quickly, and then we'll talk about whatever the group wants to talk about. The first specific recommendation within the voter engagement broad recommendation was to include voter engagement as part of the city's broader equity, inclusion, and community engagement strategy. The city has taken a number of steps to create a new department and hire staff. And so this group felt like of course, it would be up to the city manager and council as how they want that done. But it made sense, I think, to this group that it would be kind of a component of that effort, because I think logically it makes sense there. So our second recommendation got to that, which is council should direct the city manager to assign responsibility for developing and implementing a voter engagement plan to a specific department within the city administration. And I think the importance of that is to make sure somebody in the city is actually is tasked with that responsibility, so it doesn't just kind of dissipate among numbers of departments and people just think somebody else is doing it, so that there's some accountability going forward. Third was to develop a voter resource guide with a unique and prominent landing page on the city's website, as well as cross-referencing the voter engagement tab throughout the city's website and other electronic communications tailored to where in the election cycle the city is at any given time. So the thinking would be ramp it up leading into the election, and then not that it would go away during other times, but you might focus on registration information and things like that. Number 4 was to create a standard process for using the Gov delivery email system to distribute voter information tied to various deadlines and important dates related to each local election. And one thing I saw today, and I think it still kind of is included in this, but I sent an email around to you all from the city transportation department, where they were encouraging people, it was kind of a cross-fertilization effort. They were encouraging people to follow and use the transportation department's social media platforms so they could reach more people as well. And I think the city could create a Twitter handle, related to voter information as well, and use that again in conjunction with the Gov delivery system. And part of this with the voter engagement, I think too, that the city would like to do, I think it benefits the city in a broader perspective. And a citizen actually made this point to me, by encouraging voter engagement, you will also drive more traffic to the city's website potentially, so that it serves, it expands and potentially reaches more citizens just for general information purposes, not just necessarily for voter engagement. So there's there could be a secondary benefit to kind of driving people to the website for information related to voter engagement. The 5th one was to develop and distribute a voter resources guide modeled on those used for statewide judicial races. That I think that statute, Brandon and Jane, that they don't do that anymore, right? They got rid of the voter resource guide. Is that, I can't remember. Not the judicial guide. Do they still do it, or did they do away with it? I don't remember, but it's somewhat irrelevant.
Yeah, there is a guide. that goes out, but I'm not sure if it goes out based on that statutory authority or not.
Okay, I can't. So, but because that statute was used, our group recommends that some sort of resource guide based on that, because it obviously was part of the general statutes for judicial races, could be a model for local elections. And so to develop that resource guide, kind of using those statutory standards that may or may not exist anymore today, and use the city's distribution channels in addition to the U.S. Postal Service to try to get that out to as many citizens as possible. Number 6 was to promote and continue free bus transportation on election day. Right now, the city has free bus transportation for everyone. I don't know, it's been extended, but I don't know whether that's going to be a permanent feature of the transit system. But if it is, then that's great. But if it's not, at least we want to encourage it to be made available on election day. Number 7 was develop an interactive city map with information like district representatives, polling places, and other related information tied to a voter's address. There's some of that now on Raleigh iMaps, but it's not, you have to know and you have to be looking for that. So it's not necessarily easily accessible for someone that's looking for voter information. So to somehow incorporate that in this unified tab. Beth clearly we have a ex officio pooch member of our team today.
This is Foxy, so sorry.
Foxy does not get a vote, so I just want everybody to know we're not packing the vote here. My cat may wander in too, and Bobo doesn't get a vote either. We are inclusive, though. We will include dogs and cats in our meetings. Number 8 was to develop a PSA campaign in coordination with community groups and local businesses to encourage citizens to register to vote and to vote. There was one suggestion that the city consider using wraps that they put on buses, but I was told by the city attorney's office, I didn't get the exact reason, but those have to be commercial paid advertisements. So that I guess there's some arrangement or some situation so it wouldn't be, the city doesn't control that. They can't just come in and say, hey, we're going to wrap these buses in voter information. I suppose that some group of businesses could decide that that's a good idea. And Brandon, you guys and Janie, tell me if I'm wrong there, but I assume businesses could get together and decide, hey, we want to do a campaign to encourage voters and we're going to pay for the wraps, whatever they are, and do that. But it sounded to me like the city could not do that because it's not just their buses to just wrap whenever they want to. Is that generally accurate without any real good basis for my statement anyway?
So there is a policy that Go Raleigh uses in the administration of the bus advertising policy, and it would just need to be consistent with that. I don't know those parameters off the top of my head.
Okay, I was told that they had to be commercial, which suggests somebody had to pay for them. And again, I guess that doesn't mean they can't be done. It just means that somebody would have to pay for them. And then the last one was consider using the Public Utility Department's billing newsletter and the Parks and Recreation newsletter and any other city newsletters that are sent out regularly to also provide voter information and direct them to important related information. And then the last one was something to consider, but not a direct recommendation. Was that the study group talked about how the city could use the local access TV channel to support voter engagement. And the issue was kind of the city has to be careful that it doesn't somehow appear to be favoring any candidate, whether they're an incumbent or anyone else. So televising particular candidate forums and things like that could potentially be a problem. But most of us, I think the group felt like if we could address that situation and in theory, know that it was a perfectly objective approach that made the city comfortable, then we thought it was a good idea, but we didn't feel like we had the technical skill set or enough time to really study that issue to make a firm recommendation. But I think we all kind of agreed if we could do it in a way that was objective and gave everybody fair access and made the city comfortable that they weren't going to be subject to some sort of litigation over it, that it was worth exploring. So those are the public engagement or voter engagement specific recommendations we had. And so with that, in addition to the overall document, I did want to make one more point to the document I sent out. One thing that I think we talked about throughout the kind of meetings, and we touched on them, but I don't think we expressly stated it anywhere, but I think, and I included it in the document, but if anybody disagrees with it, we kind of had this tension between the desire to make sure to the best we could that council focused some of its energies, a significant amount of its energies on kind of the long-term strategic direction of the city, and we thought that, that's why you had some at large and the mayor, that their kind of role was, because they were voted on by the whole city, their perspective should be, and hopefully would be, kind of the long-term strategic future and vision for the city, while the district representatives, of course, we hope they're also considering that and, in their deliberations, but certainly the political pressure that they have and the influences that kind of they're subject to would be more localized because they are district representatives. And of course, you have rezonings in districts, and those things create political issues and political pressures. Among other things, you've got public works projects, parks projects, all of those. There's some tension among district councilors to get those things delivered for their district. And so some of our recommendations were to encourage the strategic perspective, while others were intended to kind of enhance local or the district representation and kind of getting citizens close to their representatives. And so in the document, I believe, and as I was thinking about it, and I want to know what you all think. I think the recommendations are kind of interrelated because, some of them, I'm not sure I would be as strongly supportive in the absence of some of the other recommendations. So for example, I initially thought I was going to support an additional at-large member. But I came around to supporting adding one district member. And part of that, my thinking was, going to 4-year terms, counterbalanced my concerns because, having 4-year terms, elected officials, we hope, will have more time to think about, the longer term strategic issues. If there's an immediate, very controversial matter that, shows up in year 1 of a term, if a counselor knows they have 3 more years, the thinking is, that pressure might be a little bit less than it might be if they knew the election was in 6 months or 8 months. And so, to me, that was a balance. Kind of listed them out. And then of course, staggering was also we didn't have everybody going for 4 years. I don't know that I like the idea of 4-year terms if everybody's up all at one time, because 4 years is a long time. And I think voters want to at least have some influence over what's going on, and what, as we stated in the document, it gives the citizens some way to, to have an election every 2 years, even though they don't get to vote on everybody. It allows some course corrections and kind of allows the overall electorate to kind of nudge council and telegraph some information about the direction they may or may not agree with. So overall, my point is, my view is, these recommendations, and I'm very supportive of this because they're a package. And I think I would like us to convey that to council, that we support all of these recommendations because they work together. And we may not, I hope that council doesn't try to pick them apart and say, we're going to do just one of them or two of them, because I think that then they don't achieve the overall goal that I think, if enacted together and implemented, will achieve for the city. So that's my soapbox. I'm going to let everybody else have their say now. Councilor Weeks, yes, sir.
Yes, first of all, I appreciate the voter engagement process. And when we were talking about it at the last meeting, my concern was about citizens without technology in their home, and mostly part of District B and C fall into that category. And number 9 is a good example, and I brought this up, and I hope that the city will be able to do this in their utilities bill. That will help a whole lot on that, because there are a lot of people without computers, technology, and things in their home. And that's been my concern, and we need to leave that in there. And then when you talked about us talking about the local access TV, I had mentioned RTN, which also had a segment called community events. And I don't know if someone was supposed to check on that, because they used to have community events, and they will bring up things that will be happening in the city of Raleigh in different communities. And I don't know if follow-up has been made on that. That's why I mentioned the local TV access. That will help a whole lot. That would take away from people without computers, but they'd be able to look at TV and see the announcement. So otherwise, you did a beautiful job on what we indicated in our last meeting. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I can be corrected, but when you were talking about the voter resource guide, if I'm not mistaken, the State Board of Election put out a voter guide, and I think the Wake County Board of Election put out a voter guide, and it's sent in the mail. I don't know if it'll be done, because, as we say, it's according to what monies are approved for them to do that.
Well, I
Okay.
think,
Thank you.
thank you for the comments. I think that I haven't heard anybody suggest that the city can't do a voter guide. So I think there's nothing preventing them from doing it. I guess at this point, it's going to be, does the city want to do it in terms of, whatever expense and logistical efforts it will take. I think we heard from earlier that there will be some savings by moving the elections to even years. So that there could be some reallocation of funds to do a voter guide. And then, to the extent there are mailings that are already going out, by the Board of Election potentially, or the county, we might be able to piggyback on some of that. So, I'm not suggesting it's a minor expense, but in the scheme of a almost $1.1 billion budget, and if voter engagement and citizen engagement is a priority, I suspect that if the city council wants that to happen, there is money and flexibility to make that happen. I don't think it's a matter of money, or it's just do they want to do it, and do they, logistically, is there some reason that it would be difficult, for the staff to be able to do it, so. And then on the Raleigh TV, I don't think there's any, certainly they could run, I think, community events, and advertising, that kind of thing. If I assume that if I don't know how it works, but if a group is sponsoring a forum, and there's I don't know how it works. I frankly haven't watched RTN in a while, except for council meetings and other community group meetings. Doing a list of just, hey, this group notified us that they're having an event, and if the city does that as a matter of course for community events, I'm not sure there's any reason they can't run an additional community event. I think the point we were getting at in this was more, to the extent there was any interest, or could the city televise voter forums, candidate forums, and things like that. And the concern was, what happens if only three or four candidates show up for this forum, and some are left off for some reason. The candidates could raise potentially issues about fairness, and if they didn't get invited to it because some particular group left people off, or thought a candidate was too fringe or too minor. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your view, when the government is involved, if you're a fringe client way out on the edges of politics, you're still entitled to participate. I think, Brandon and Jamie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as you are a candidate and get on the ballot properly and do those things, if you're a fringe candidate, you're still entitled to participate. And if a group chose not to invite somebody like that, that could potentially be a problem. So I think that's what the city's trying to avoid, among potentially other things. So other comments, Harvey, please.
So I'm fine with the recommendations. You noted that we'll save money by going on the even numbered years. The report does not reflect that. It might be useful for us to delineate what those savings are likely to be, and that those savings could then be reallocated to the voter engagement process. That way we tie the two together and we find the resources that they need to carry out some of the other recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good point. I will, and we have Gerry Cohen on. I think he's the one that suggested it. The potential problem I see is we don't necessarily know how much. And so I'll have to think about, we'll have to think about how we put that in there. And I see Gerry, I'll let him, if we can unmute him, it looks like he's could maybe weigh in on this a little bit. How do you think we can handle that? Are we guaranteed some savings? I don't want to say anything. We don't want to say anything, obviously, that isn't going to happen or potentially happening, but I don't think we have to be, precise on the number, but I think we'd like to be able to say, there are likely savings that could be redirected towards voter engagement programs.
Well, I don't have any position on what should or shouldn't happen with any savings, but the city had budgeted, I think, between $800,000 and $900,000 to hold an October election at the same time Kerry would have been voting. And if there was a runoff, a similar amount of money, we don't really have a budget total for the November 2022 city election. The Board of Elections basically charges incremental costs for concurrent municipal elections, but I haven't examined exactly the contract between the city and the county. Usually there'll be more ballot styles, and in the past, like for the city bond issue last year, I think we've added one extra employee for each of the 206, the 110 city precincts. And so it's a much smaller amount. I don't want to give a total, and I don't think the election board has one, but it's relatively small in comparison with $800,000.
So we could certainly put a state, and I'm not holding you to it. And certainly not, but it would be reasonable for us to say something to the effect, there likely will be substantial savings in the cost of administering elections since they're moved to even years. And then for us, I'm not asking you to endorse this part, but we could make a statement, to the extent there are savings, we recommend they be reallocated towards X, Y, and Z. So I'm asking you about the first part. Is it likely we will see some sort of savings?
I think that it's a city election at the time of the November general election costs less than a standalone one or one in conjunction with Kerry. And it's probably significant. It's probably significant.
Okay, that's all I appreciate that. That's all I think we need to say. And whatever the dollars are, if it's $5 or $500,000, we can make that statement. Does that sound acceptable to people? Because we don't want to say, hey, there'll be $800,000 and something happens and it's $25. Okay, so thanks, Harvey, for that suggestion. I'll add that in and figure it out. Other comments, questions, concerns? We're 100%, I think, on the recommendations. So nobody has an issue with those. To the extent does anybody have an issue with the concept that's in the document about them being kind of interconnected and working together so that as a whole, I guess in a simplified fashion, my personal perspective is as a whole, if they're implemented, the positive impact will be greater potentially than if they are pick and choose, and some are adopted and some aren't. Now, we may all have personal opinions about which ones we feel stronger about, but to me, they knit together in a way that they will overall, do more positive than any of the recommendations individually, even though we may all think individually each of them does improve the situation. My view is together, they do more than any of them independently. Is that an okay statement? That's it's in the document. So if anybody disagrees with that, let me know. We got another ex officio member. Yes, Councilor Weeks.
Yes, I just want to commend you. You did an outstanding job of compiling the information that we want to send to the city. And I'm more worried about them cherry picking and picking out one and not taking the whole report that we are doing and try to let them know that it should be interrelated and they should be working together on all of them. So that's the only thing. You brought up a good point, but you did an outstanding job on compiling the report to go to the city. With the addition of what Harvey just stated, I think it's just really put a little bit more powerful info in there.
Well, thank you. And it wasn't just me, but I appreciate that. I certainly had help from Harvey and Justin, and I've got some comments from other folks as well. Other comments, concerns, questions? And if you think of anything else, obviously, feel free to share it later. One other thing, I added an appendix, and I didn't have time to think through everything else that might be potentially added to it. So if you look at that, obviously the Excel workbook we have, one of my only concern about that is it's a complex workbook. So I'll need probably some help from staff to kind of get it in a way that makes sense, attaching it to the document so it works. And then the meeting minutes, And I don't know what else, we need to attach. We could attach the, I don't know that we need to, because it may introduce some irrelevant things, but the Charlotte report we looked at, I don't know of other documents that, there are footnotes in the document I sent around. I don't think it's worth pulling all that information together. This will be circulated electronically. I did hot links so folks can click right on them. I got some guidance from the chief of staff that council preferred not to have a bunch of attachments because they were getting comfortable with their electronically handling stuff. And I've been trying to make sure that everything that we've talked about is included on board docs so that there are places. The one thing today or this agenda, I included the final workbook so that there should be a way to hot link that into the document. But I'm certainly open if you think of other things that we ought to attach to the report when we issue it to council after it's finalized. Let me know. And we're going to have our second meeting in August, so we can fine tune things. And that was kind of the plan that I didn't want everyone to be under the gun today to provide complete and final thoughts and comments. So anything else? All right, well, I'm going to let everybody go then if we're good with this. And again, if you got comments, please, we have time. Just let me know sooner rather than later, because trying to distill, as I've said in emails, distilling comments from 10 people or 9, I can distill my own comments pretty easily sometimes, but getting them all kind of combined and making them make sense and consistent is sometimes hard. So the sooner you get them to me, it makes it a little easier. But otherwise, we'll see each other on the 25th. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric, for your leadership. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody.